Good. Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending our webinar entitled 6 Succession Strategies to Develop Managers with a Global Mindset. I am pleased to be doing this jointly with John Gillis from First Order Consulting. And I'm going to start just telling you a little bit about myself. My name is Linda Janak, and normally I'd be the core presenter, but I think John has so much to offer on this topic. I thought that it would be wonderful to include him, and he's going to tell you a little bit about himself. But I'm the president and CEO of Talent Guard, and we are a full-service talent management software company as well as consulting services. And so I welcome you today. Normally we like to have a highly interactive webinar, and we certainly encourage you to send us any chat along the way at any time for any reason, and we're going to try to hold the questions till the end, but if something comes up and it's pertinent, I'll try to facilitate that and get that in John's line of sight. We also, the both of us, welcome you to link in with us if you're LinkedIn users. And without further ado, I'm going to pass the realm over to John so that he can get started in the presentation.
Hi, Linda, and welcome everybody to this call. It's a pleasure to be with you here today. We're looking forward to talking about this topic of 6 succession strategies to develop managers with a global mindset. A lot of the information you're going to see today is from a doctoral program I did at the University of Pennsylvania. It's a joint program between the Wharton Business School and the Graduate School of Education. This was my dissertation topic, and so a lot of it is done from a literature review and the research with global leadership development practitioners, as well as looking at how can we make this practitioner friendly so that companies can actually use that in their workplace. When we look at the 6 succession strategies, we really look at these 6 that you see on the screen right here. First, it's identifying and benchmarking global roles based on an environment and business goals. It's so critical to make sure that we have our roles identified that align to the strategic business objectives of the organization. And the cascading of those roles is critical because that's going to be the foundation for succession planning. The second part is creating a global competency framework based on those roles. When I first set out to do the dissertation topic, I thought that I would be making a global leadership competency framework. But it turns out that there's many, many different frameworks out there. There's a lady in Finland that put together and did a metadata analysis of 30 different competency frameworks and really pared it down to about 13 competencies. I took another 30 competency frameworks and added on top of that. So we had 60 competency frameworks, and what we have now is what we'll present later today is a competency framework that is very manageable and easy to use and implement at organizations. The third area is identifying high potentials, your talent pools. This is key as we look for organic growth and organic promotion within an organization, and the critical foundation parts of this is performance reviews as well as multi-rater assessments. The fourth area is the development, the learning gaps, and how are we going to develop? What methods are we going to use? What job functions and roles is the learning targeted towards? And at what levels, what proficiency levels do we need to develop? The fifth area is creating and implementing a custom global development plan. It's not one size fits all, but it is an IDP, an individual development plan. What size company are you at? What job function are you in? What level are you in your career? All these things need to be considered when you start looking at what's going to be the most effective development. Finally, we have to measure. Measurement makes everything where you can track it, the progress, the development, and see what your return on investment is or what your return on management is when we're doing these 6 succession strategies. So that's the foundation for today. And as we said earlier, if you have any questions or issues that come up during the call, please feel free to type those in, and then we'll have plenty of time to do question and answers at the end. But if you do have issues during or questions or comments, please put that in the chat format. Okay, so looking at today's global environment, we have an environment that is changing. We have economic and trade policies that are different for each region and different countries. I'm doing a project right now in continental Europe, and the difference between Poland and France versus Russia is a challenge. We also look at outsourcing and offshoring, two totally different things, but looking at more and more companies looking to outsource some of their tasks that are non-critical. Also the potential of offshoring. You also have the flip side of that of people homeshoring, bringing business back due to transportation costs and things like that. But how do we manage that? Another area is the shrinking globe, or the world is flat. Looking at more and more companies are doing business globally and working across different time frames, different partners, different channels, and it's a shrinking globe. There is a dramatic increase in the global trade and investment. You see this more and more with different companies really working to look at where their investments are and how they're going to manage a diverse workforce spread across different geographic regions. There's differences, time zones, infrastructures, cultures, government regulations, beliefs, customer preferences, economic conditions, employee relations, customs. And that's just the beginning of the list. How do we act in different cultures that have all these different differences that impact the way business is done? I'm working with one organization right now, and we did a project in Great Britain, Australia, New Zealand, now continental Europe. Next is China and India. And even though we're doing the same activity in each one of those regions, the way we do it has to be completely different due to these differences that we noted here. Finally, today's global environment is a borderless world. Linguistic, cultural, political, economic, and social borders create conflicts and tensions, but yet we have workers that are going across all of these borders. So if we set this up as the global environment, our next step is to say, how do we do business in that global environment? So these are the areas that we talked about a second ago, the 6 areas, and now we look at business going to fundamentally altering operations. Our COO has to think in a new mindset. Our head of supply chain has to think in a new mindset as far as how we're operating. Second thing is that we're thinking globally, yet acting locally. How can we scale and get the economies of scale of a global operation, yet also drink the local wine and know what the local customer preferences are and how you actually do business locally? I can tell you story after story about where we go in with a global standard operating model, yet it doesn't work locally. Next is understanding the globalization issues. So in global business today, you have to understand all the different components that are going to be a part of being an international, multinational, or a truly global company. Addressing new opportunities and competition. With each new region, we usually talk about Brazil, Russia, India, China. Now we're starting to talk about Africa. They all provide new opportunities, a growing middle class for new products. However, there's also new competition. It's not just the developed countries that are having and putting out companies and products and services, but these new emerging companies and countries have products and services out there that are competing because they understand the local marketplace even better than the developed countries. We have a complex, changing, and often ambiguous environment. And we're going to be talking about leadership today and succession planning and the challenges of finding leaders who are comfortable operating in a complex, changing, and ambiguous environment. It's not black and white. It most often is gray. And can we make decisions in that ambiguity? And finally, we're changing our business models that evolve the job functions. The job function of yesterday will not be the job function of tomorrow because our new business models, our new operating strategies, the strategic business objectives to operate as a global business are evolving what's required of each job. So we talked about a global environment. Here we talked about global business. The next thing to talk about is global leadership. So if these 6 things on your screen represent today's global business environment, what does a leader need to have to operate in this global business environment? The first thing is we need leaders that it's more complex than a domestic environment due to integration responsibilities, national boundaries, and cultural diversity. And so the level of complexity, the level of proficiency of leadership skills is greater for global leaders. Second thing is the global integration and the local responsiveness, balancing that commercial yet also cultural concerns, and knowing that you have to balance both profit with people and how to do that globally and locally. Third thing with global leadership is just being ill-prepared to respond to the evolving business environment. It is constantly changing, it's dynamic, and the rate of change is only increasing year after year. Our next area is really the crux of the matter, is that we have a deficient number of prepared leaders. CEO after CEO, company after company say we have a global business strategy. However, we do not have the leaders to execute the strategy. Where do we get them? And you cannot grow them overnight. How do we prepare today for the leadership demands that we're going to need tomorrow to execute the next global business strategy that we have? Strengthened and irrefutable need for a new kind of leadership. It's not just taking someone who's a strong domestic leader and thinking that they will be successful in a global role. It is a different type of leadership. It is a global leadership due to the complexity of what that leader deals with. And finally, the global leader needs to adapt to different cultures' leadership style preferences based on different cultural norms and values. So the research that you're going to see is culturally contingent to Western-based cultures, saying how do we take a Western-based cultural leader and prepare them for a global role, even though they're proficient as a leader in a domestic environment. So we talked about the global environment, then we talked about global business. This is global leadership, and our final area to talk about, and this is where it comes in, the succession strategy that's the topic of this webinar today, is really saying how do we then develop these global leaders? If these are the 6 things we need, how do we adequately develop and prepare? The first thing is high contact methods that are relevant and effective. These are going to be more likely to change behavior than low contact delivery methods. And we'll go into this a little bit more in a few minutes. The second thing is proactive in developing global perspectives, global skills, and the global leadership competencies. We can't wait till it's time for a person to take that role. We need to develop their global perspectives, skills, and competencies today in preparation for them being prepared to take the role when the time comes. Next area is just helping our leaders understand the global market enough to be effective. Next is a primary means for a company to differentiate itself based on its human capital. It's not enough now to differentiate yourself on your product or service. It's your human capital that's really going to differentiate your company from competitors in this new global environment. Global leadership development must be connected to the company's business strategy. The alignment there must be completely in sync in order to be a source of sustainable competitive advantage. If you have an organization with a corporate business strategy and the global leadership development is not aligned, then it's not going to be the source of a competitive advantage that you're seeking. Right now I'm developing this program into a 3-day workshop for a company, and we have met with the CEO and all the vice presidents around the globe to make sure that we know what their strategy is, what they want to see out of the program, and what the outcome of the program is going to be, and how we can sustain the learning beyond the program. That is a way to align the global leadership development with the company's business strategy. So each one of the executives has their input into the development of the program so that program can be a source of sustainable competitive advantage. Finally, global leadership development needs to consider multinational, multicultural, multilingual, and multimedia. One of the organizations that I do leadership development programs for, we do programs all over the world. And yet the participants in the programs, we do not wait for us to go to their region to participate in the program. Instead, they sign up for the week that they will be a part of the program, and then they find out where the location is. And so by doing that, we ensure that the classroom is not only cross-functional, but the classroom is also cross-geographical, so that we can have representatives from each of the areas that this company does business, and therefore benefiting it by having a better network and truly representing the global work environment that the organization works in. So we talked about the global environment, global business, global leaders, and finally, global leadership development. So now I'm going to switch off of this area and really look more into global leadership development based on some of the work that we did at the University of Pennsylvania. So the business case for doing global leadership development at your organization is global corporate performance dependent upon global leaders. You have a changing business environment that's creating competition as well as opportunities, and that global leadership competency proficiency was not required of our leaders in previous generations. However, it's required today so that if we are going to actually capitalize the global opportunities, we must have global leaders. Global leadership development prepares these global leaders to address the gap between the needs that we have as well as the prepared global leaders for tomorrow. We don't want to go and say we have an excellent organizational strategy to go global, but we don't have anybody to carry it out. We need to invest in global leadership development today in order to have our global leaders ready for tomorrow. So global leadership development is part of a larger talent management framework. It really, looking as the holy grail of HR's talent management, is a systematic, comprehensive solution integrating all the different parts of talent management, everything from recruiting, succession planning, career development, learning and development. All of this is integrated in order to attract, identify, select, develop, retain the pipeline of high performance, high potential, future global leadership talent. That's what we do here at Talent Guard, and that's what we do at First Order Consulting in order to help organizations with that comprehensive solution so that they can reach this holy grail of talent management. Going back to global leadership, what do we mean exactly? A few definitions to help set the table. It's an international, multinational, or global company's manager or executive's ability to motivate, influence, and enable individuals across those national boundaries as well as cultural diversity so that they can contribute to the accomplishment of a company's goals. If that's global leadership, then the competency is a body of knowledge, skill, or ability that does the same thing. And then if we look at global leadership development, that is a company's effort to improve an employee's global leadership competency, job-specific behavior. So those are the definitions that we went off. Now, if we take and put on our academic hat, there's been quite a few leadership theories throughout the years. It started a long time ago saying that leadership is really based on the trait theory. This is leaders are born, saying you have specific traits when you're born and those will make you a good leader. However, as we evolved our leadership theories, we then said There are some traits that help make a leader, but we have to consider contingency, situational, transactional, transformational leadership theories that basically are saying that it's not just leaders are born, but they are made. And the context that a leader is in is actually going to be it's going to be a determining factor on how effective that person is. So a leader in one context, based on their traits, behaviors, competencies, may not be an effective leader in another context because of the actual situation that they are in. So what you're going to see here is the evolution of this leadership theory to say the context and situation matters. So leaders are born and leaders are made. It's not a mutually exclusive area. Because of this, we have to look at traits versus competencies. I mentioned earlier the global leadership competency model that we built this off of from a lady in Finland. She identified 30 global leadership competency models, really talked about 13 competencies. I took another 30 global leadership competency models to find the gap and didn't find any. All of those other 30, so now 60 in total, came down to 13 areas required for leadership. The change that we made that is out of those 13, 6 are competencies, whereas the other 7 really map to personality traits. And the difference between competencies and personality traits is one of the key findings here that we need to help internalize to understand. Your personality trait is what you're born with, and overall, there's not much a company can do to alter or change someone's personality trait. On top of personality traits, you have someone's values. Again, not going to be changed too much by a company. Then you have their cultural background, everything that they've experienced really for their entire life that they're bringing with them to an organization. You then have their corporate work experience that's easily seen on a resume to find out what kind of experiences these people have that help build their competencies. An organization can invest to develop the competencies which are the outermost of the circle. If you try to change and develop someone's personality traits, it's going to be much harder because those are more hardwired. So by understanding personality traits versus competencies, we can say that nature's leaders are born over leaders are made. There's a balance of both. They're stable forms of an individual's character. It's rather absolute. It cannot be developed, the personality traits, and they're formed by hereditary, cultural, familial, and social interactions. This influences learning and development method effectiveness. However, you can't learn and develop these personality traits. So with that, the personality traits that usually come up in quite a bit of research are these 5. And because of that, it's called the Big 5 because they're referenced by multiple research. First one is extroversion. That's energy, positive emotions, urgency, the tendency to seek stimulation in the company of others. Second one is agreeableness. This is compassionate and cooperative rather than suspicious and antagonistic towards others. The third one is conscientiousness. This is showing self-discipline, acting dutifully, aim for achievement, planned rather than spontaneous behavior. The fourth one is emotionally stable. Now, sometimes when you see the Big 5, you'll see this as neuroticism. I chose to focus on the positive and went with emotionally stable. So the opposite of this is neuroticism. But emotionally stable is calm and free from persistent negative feelings. Finally, the fifth one is openness to experience. It's an appreciation for adventure, curiosity, emotion, unusual ideas, and a variety of experience. So these are the 5 personality traits, lots of research that goes into these, that are hardwired within an individual that help say leaders are born, and these are the personality traits that each person is on a different continuum of these 5 personality traits. So if those are the personality traits, then out of those 13 we originally talked about, we removed 7 that really map to personality traits that you can't train, and we identified 6 that you can train, you can develop, and these are really the 6 that we need to focus in on as a global organization looking to develop leaders for our succession strategy. These 6 are, first, engagement in personal transformation. The knowledge to commit to ongoing development of personal knowledge, skills, and abilities. The second one is knowledge. This is cosmopolitan savvy needed to perform business literacy. It could be structural, technical, political, systems, standards, issues, opportunities. However, in addition to that cosmopolitan savvy, we also need to have an understanding of the local tension. Third one is networking skills. The skill to create and maintain relationships throughout an organization. Fourth one is social judgment skills. The skill to have a big picture and long-term orientation, really looking at cause and effect, interdependencies, consequences of decisions, so that this leader can consider multiple constituents' perspectives because they can see the big picture. Fifth one is self-awareness. The ability to have self-confidence, self-reliance, insight, as well as social and cultural awareness. A lot of times, one of the buzzwords recently in the last decade is emotional intelligence, and I think this one really reflects well with that. Finally, self-regulation, the ability to control impulses, maintain integrity, and remain flexible as one adapts to new situations. So again, we built off of some of the work done in previous literature and pulled together these 6 leadership competencies. Now, one of the things we talked about earlier on the 6 succession strategies, number 2 was to create a global competency framework. We found through the research that most competency frameworks, in order to be effective, are 5 to 7 competencies. Anything more than that, and the business will be overwhelmed trying to understand, effectively develop, effectively assess to. So 5 to 7 competencies is usually the optimal number, and it just turns out here that we had 6, so right in that sweet spot. So this is the Global Leadership Competency Model that we've aggregated and done research on. I know other organizations have other competency models. If you do have your own competency model, just make sure that it's at a manageable amount so that it is actually actioned against and does not overwhelm the organization. So we went through kind of the global business environment, global leadership development, the definitions, the holy grail of talent management, having a comprehensive solution, and looking at how we came up with these 6 competencies as well as the personality traits. With all that information, we then said we need a framework. What are we trying to establish here? So if you look at the top row, we have some of the key talent management functions. Recruiting and succession planning in that first column. Career development in the middle. Learning and development on the right. If you look at these, let's look at the first one. Succession planning is the topic of today, and we need to consider someone's personality traits that we talked about, the big 5, their values, cultural background, and their corporate work experience. In addition to looking at those things, and those go in order as far as the first one, personality traits, is the most ingrained, and then the ones called corporate work experience is more external. The other thing we need to look at and consider is career development. How do we develop these 6 competencies? So we've recruited and done succession planning and selected an individual based on their personal attributes, but now we need to consider these 6 global leadership competencies and develop those so that they're ready when the succession planning process kicks in to fill that next role. So in order to develop those competencies, the third area is looking at learning and development and what method is going to be most effective. The ones that we looked at are 4 high contact, that's expatriate assignment, global teams, experiential learning, and coaching, as well as low contact. That's intercultural training, assessment, and reflection. Now, it's not a one-time process. The blue arrow at the bottom means to reflect that it is an iterative process, that you will increase your global leadership competency proficiency as you go through different company types, that being multinational, international, and global, as well as different job functions and different levels within that job function. So it's an iterative process where you'll continue to grow and develop, and you want to bake in a culture of continuous improvement at your organization. With that framework, I now take you to the results. We looked at global leadership development practitioners, and we asked them, looking at the job functions of CEO, finance, operations, information technology, human resources, and sales, which personality trait is most critical for these job functions? And it is key to understand that different job functions have different personality traits that are more critical. So for the CEO, is fairly balanced, with conscientiousness being the lead, as well as emotionally stable being just a little bit higher than that. That was the same for HR. However, for finance, operations, and IT, you can see that conscientiousness scored extremely higher than the other personality traits. And for sales, you had extroversion scoring the highest. So depending on the job function, the personality traits varied as far as which one was more important by job. Now, if we cut this a different way, same data, just presented in a different way, we have the personality traits at the bottom and then the job titles there. You can see that for extroversion, you would hire someone in sales. For conscientiousness, you would want to put that person in finance. If you're really strong and being emotionally stable, that person would look to be in finance. And so it's the same data, just cut a little bit different way. So that's personality traits. If we now look at competencies, we can say which competencies are critical for each job function. For the CEO, we have social judgment skills that scored the highest. For finance, operations, and information technology, we had knowledge that scored the highest. For HR, it was much closer, but knowledge still scored the highest, followed closely by networking skills and then social judgment. And finally, for sales, the networking skills scored the highest. So just presenting the same information a little bit different way, we look at if your strength is engagement and personal transformation, HR scored the highest for that. If your strength is knowledge, then it was both finance and IT that scored the highest. If your strength was networking skills, it's sales. If it was social judgment, then it was the CEO, followed up by HR. For self-awareness, it was the CEO, and then for self-regulation, it was really even across all of them, with finance just being a little bit higher. So it's just interesting to look at how each job function is going to require different proficiency levels in the competencies, as well as different personality traits. Going back to the foundation that one size does not fit all for leadership development, and we really need to tailor an individual development plan based on what job function the individual has. We then asked the global leadership development practitioners, which one's more important, personality traits or competencies? And overall is pretty much a bell curve suggesting fairly equal, with personality traits scoring just a little bit higher than the actual competencies, but overall fairly equal. Next, we said which one is going to be more important. Is it more important for a domestic role or a global role? You can see here that it was fairly balanced for engagement in personal transformation, knowledge, self-awareness, and self-regulation. The most people said it's the same requirement between domestic and global. However, for networking skills and social judgment skills, they said it's probably going to be more important for global roles. The key here is that the competencies are the same for domestic and global roles, yet you need more of a proficiency in this competency for the global role. And so that's where we have the iterative development for our global leaders. So now we're going to look at the development method. If we have 6 succession strategies and we've identified the roles, we've created the competency framework, we've identified our high potentials, the next area was identifying the learning gaps and then creating the custom global development plan for those gaps. So this is 4 and 5 of the 6 succession strategies. So the 4 high contact methods is expat assignments number 1. And this is what people usually think of when they think of global leadership development, as it is an international work assignment requiring an employee to temporarily move to another country for at least 6 months. The issue with that is the cost and the failure rate. And when you have such a high cost as well as a high failure rate, then companies need to consider other high contact methods to develop global leadership skills. So the 3 other ones that we promote here are global teams, an ongoing work-based group or temporary development activity group whose members reside in different countries organized around a specific work task. Third is experiential learning, which is a structured experience with learning objectives, including activities like simulations, case studies, and role-playing. The 4th area is coaching. This is a relationship with an individual providing accountability and development in hopes for behavior change. Now, these 4 learning development methods are classified as high contact. The other 3 are low contact. The first one is intercultural training. This is a formal training around similar and different world cultures. The second one is assessment, an objective analysis, self-assessment, 360-degree feedback, performance reviews, assessment centers of one's competency proficiency. And the third one is reflection. This is a specific time set aside for processing, implementing, and retaining the lessons learned. So when we looked at these 7 learning development methods, we then went and asked the global leadership development practitioners which ones are the most effective. And this is what they said. If you want to train knowledge and develop that competency, then an expat assignment is going to be the most effective. If it's networking skills, global teams would be the most effective. If it's social judgment skills, experiential learning. If it's engagement and personal transformation and self-regulation, then coaching. Intercultural training did not score the highest on any of the competencies, nor did reflection. However, assessment scored the highest on self-awareness. So that was the top one, and then here's the close seconds. So the idea here being that if you want to train to self-awareness, the SA in the 5th column, then you would look at doing an assessment as well as coaching and reflection. If you wanted to develop engagement and personal transformation, you would look at coaching and experiential learning. So now with this information coupled with the information we went over previously, when you want to develop your global leaders, first you need to consider what job function they're in. Second, you need to consider the competency that you want to develop and look at what the most effective learning development method is. It is not one size fits all. So we have to build a blended learning approach dependent on what competencies we're looking to develop, and that's going to help determine the learning and development method. So with that, I get to our final area where we're actually looking at the implications from this research. So implications include, first, the research questioned hypothesis that personality traits and global leadership competencies would be idiosyncratic to company type was not supported by the data. That means my original question was, how do the personality traits and competencies, how does the dependency change to determine if it's a domestic, international, multinational, or global company? And I found it wasn't different between those different 4 groups. However, it is idiosyncratic to job function. So depending on the job function, there's different personality trait and global leadership competency requirements. The second, the difference between domestic and global leaders is not the competency. Instead, it's the degree of proficiency per leadership competency. If you remember earlier, we talked about the ambiguity, the complexity, and everything that global leadership or global business environment brings to the table, and that's going to require a leader with a greater degree of proficiency in these competencies. Third, scholars and practitioners need to use a manageable list as well as clear definitions to provide clarity on the distinctions between personality traits and global leadership competencies. And often, in fact, the majority of the time, those two were blended together instead of saying competencies can be developed by an organization, personality traits can't, so we really need to select for that, and that's the key to succession planning. Fourth, the learning and development method is very dependent on the global leadership competency needing to be developed. Companies should prioritize their learning and development budgets based on these findings and not do a one-size-fits-all. So with that, I swing back to where we started this talk, and then I'll turn it over to Linda, that this talk today was on the 6 succession strategies for developing our global leaders. First, making sure we have the right global roles that are aligned to our strategic business objectives. Second, we're creating a global competency framework. I provided you 6 here that are really a compilation of 60 different global leadership competency models. If you choose not to use these 6 and go with your organization, just remember the key spot is between 5 and 7 competencies. Third, identify your high potentials with performance reviews and multi-rater assessments. Fourth, look at those learning gaps. And then fifth, develop that custom global development plan to address those gaps today so that the leader will be ready for tomorrow. And finally, measure progress. With that, I turn it back over to Linda, and we'll be doing Q&A, and appreciate your time today.
Thank you. Great job. So much to learn in that area for organizations. And one of the questions we get most often is, if we adopt a model like this or take this model and then customize it more for our organization, how are we actually going to manage it in a way that's easy to understand and easy to communicate internally, and how do we really measure progress? And the way that we've done it in most organizations is kind of breaks down into 3 areas where, as John mentioned, you have to have an ability. Once you know what your global competencies are, and whether we use John's model or we customize that, we also need to understand what those indicators are, because as he said, it's all about the degree of proficiency. So what 360 Insights, our product, does is enable you to really look at the traits, the personality, and the culture, and then if you tie that with performance, then you're able to look at, when you're benchmarking those job roles, how are people actually doing against the roles. And that's just that first step, right? Because what we're trying to do there is understand what talent do we have once we recruit it, because we spend so much time recruiting talent and put so much emphasis on it that we have to follow it up with a back-end process, and this is what that process does. So once we've done that assess, then you have to develop to those degrees of proficiency. So most often what we've done is we've taken a little bit more of what I'm going to call a prescriptive approach. So let's say we have one of the global competencies that John mentioned. What we'll do for each of those learning and development options is come up with, based on the methodology, all of the learning and development options per indicator, so that we know, if say you're using a rating scale of 1 to 5, and you've got a 5, and that's great, then we would say, okay, you require less learning and development than someone who would get a 1 if that's a lower score. And being able to serve those up in a development plan based on everything that we know about, like he said, the environment, the business, and the leadership model. And being able to give that and hand it off to an employee and say, here is your plan, here's how long it's going to take, and, oh, by the way, let's engage in the plan, much like, I guess, like a Facebook community would work, where we can track, are we on target, are we not on target, and be able to manage it as we go and not at the end of a review cycle, which we all know does not work. If you have that data, then what you're able to truly do is drive those succession plans, because what we understand is, I know the role, I know my talent pool, now I understand the gap. Now I can look at these various gaps based on different talent pools. So if I have a talent pool that is, basically developing it for a role, for example, the head of Asia Pacific, and we need somebody who speaks X and have these skills. Now I'm able to compare that role to my talent pool and then see everybody's development plan to understand who's ready now, who's ready in 6 months, who's ready in 9 months, and be able to pull any lever that I need to either accelerate that development or slow it down in some cases. So that framework is what we use to help automate a lot of what John has presented here today to get to that ultimate place of being able to have some level of predictive development in an organization. And what that really means is the ability to make informed decisions about talent that impact true business. Before we get started in our Q&A, I just want to say that we have 2 more upcoming events. One is just a demo of Career Path by Talent Guard, and the next one is 3 tips to get executives to buy into career planning, because we know that that's very difficult at times. So at this time, what we'd like to do is invite you to send us any questions that you may have, and we will be happy to answer those. And I did not say in the beginning, and I've been getting lots of questions about this already, are we going to get copies of the slides? You most certainly will if you've been at our webinars before. Typically it's within a couple hours of the event. We'll wrap it up and post it online, and then we just send out a quick email to let you know that it's there and available for download. So you'll be able to have just the slide deck and also the recorded version as well, so that you can take this information in again and share it with people in your company. So with everybody on the line, please share some of your succession, getting managers ready for succession, helping those managers become global leaders. We're happy to to try to share in some of the things that we've experienced, because between John and I, we've done lots and lots and lots of global projects, and we're happy to share or talk with you in greater detail later as well.
So Linda, looking at one of the experiences, and I'm looking at the questions coming in, the technology piece is important and it's critical. And then the other component with that is the change management piece. And it's one of the organizations I worked with one time in the oil and gas industry, we put in the technology piece. It worked brilliantly. However, people need to be rewarded within an organization for developing their employees, especially when you consider a career ladder versus a career lattice, and knowing that you develop an employee, that they might lead your team, and it's good for that employee and good for the organization, even though it's not great for your department.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's excellent. And what you're really talking about is adoption, right, and continuous use. So one of the things you have to look at is if you don't have a culture of development, and that's kind of what we call it, a culture of coaching, how do you first have to look at the culture and transform that, and then make it an everyday thing. And like we say, the development plan is the heart of an organization, and we feel that if you can get people to adopt that development culture, some of this other stuff, what I would call the mechanics along the way, will just fall into place. I mean, we need encouragement, we need motivation, we need to have communication, we need to have executive buy-in. But first and foremost, you have to be a development-oriented culture, because if you're just checking the box at the end and saying you're doing a performance review, that's not development-oriented. That's just checking the box. We do have one question from Dan. I think it says Dan up there. How do we deal with within a civil service environment where testing is used to select leaders? And Dan, I'm gonna make an assumption. Maybe you can clarify a little bit more. Are you asking about only being able to do it with leaders, or you feel that the testing mechanism might not be effective for selecting leaders? Can you just elaborate on that a little bit more?
And while Dan's elaborating, let me share another experience that I've had when I was working with a federal agency. And succession planning, we had a challenge there just due to the process of succession planning and hiring the successor. And the issue here was that by the time a successor had been identified to fill a position, the previous person was gone for a while, and there was a gap of time, and there wasn't an effective knowledge transfer. So we've identified here really ways to develop and identify successors with this great technology and the processes. However, part of the other component here is the knowledge transfer. Once you have that successor identified, to have the previous person in the role have that transfer when possible, there's an overlap there.
Got it. And thank you, Dan, for clarifying that. That makes a lot of sense. And actually, one of my last presentations was on your very topic, which Dan's question is, we actually don't get to select hypos and develop them. In one of my experiences with a major medical device firm that was global, what happened was the CEO, in this case, was the only one who could dictate who the hypos were, and it was based on basically he was just shouting the loudest saying that these people deserve to be there. But when in reality, when we went through the process, what we found is of the 25 people that he had picked, only 3 truly belonged there. Because what we did, we started implementing. And when you're thinking about succession planning, it's based on, you could say testing, you could say assessment, but that's not all. It has to be based on two areas, right? You have to have a performance score, and you have to have a potential score. What happens is most people get the performance score from their performance review, but most people guess at potential, and that's where we use the 360 to try to enforce that. But that's only 2 areas. What you also need to do is the voice has to be integrated into that process, and that's why most organizations will use a succession planning group where they vet out everybody who's in the succession pool, and everybody has to have a rationale for why they're there, and anybody can voice concerns. So you do have to have some of that hard data, and if you're just doing testing, and if the testing is just based on a certain amount of things, then the process is too narrow. And the way that the only way that you're going to be able to change that mindset is to demonstrate the value of succession planning and demonstrate the value of either are those leaders, is the testing mechanism leading to success in the role? If yes, how long is it taking them to be proficient in the role? If no, then that's where you come in with the value proposition to your leadership team and say, here's what we're doing and here were the results. If we implement a process like this and we can test it, here's what I expect will happen, and then being able to measure it over time. Because John and I agree, change does not happen overnight. It takes a very long time, especially in government agencies.
Most definitely. Let me highlight one other experience that I had with an organization where we were building a global leadership development program, and it was for succession purposes. We took senior level that were candidates to be promoted, and they weren't hypos per se, but candidates to be promoted, and we took this research and said, how do we build the most effective program? We built a global team, people from different regions. We incorporated coaching into the program. To what Linda was just saying, we included assessment in the program. And so we then looked at how we could develop it. And theirs was based on a competency model that they had with 4 competencies. And we did an experiential classroom-based simulation using the 4 competencies as a foundation. And then after the program, they were assessed at the program, and then they had a global team working on a company project, and 6 months later they were assessed again on their competencies. And that was done by the individuals that were on the team together. So using some of this information we have, we were able to customize the program looking at those high contact methods that should develop the competencies the most, and customize it to that company's 4 key competencies that they're working on.
Mm-hmm. Dan, yeah, we can relate to that, and we're happy to take that offline if you have further questions. It seemed like that's a real challenge for you and your company. Any other questions that anyone wants to throw out there? We have a few more minutes left on the call if people are willing and able.
Linda, while we're waiting for the next question to come in, I'll just throw out a story about the requirement for a global leader. There is a corporate mandate on what they were throwing out swag or a corporate sweatshirt that had the company logo, and it was a hoodie, which is very popular in North America. However, when it went to the specific region, they said, we don't want gray, we don't want a hoodie. They're not allowed here. And sure enough, when I went to that region at the grocery store, there's a sign out front that says hoodies are not allowed. However, the corporate global scale said, no, you have to do what everyone else is doing, and they got a gray hoodie, which no one wore. So as a global leader, we do need to be sensitive to the local issues. And in this specific region, it rained all the time. All they wanted was a black rain jacket. So it's a balance between local sensitivity and that global scale.
Excellent. Well, we want to thank you very much for your time today spent with John and I, and we hope that this was helpful for you and giving you some ideas on how you can better roll this out within your organization. Okay, we've got one more question. What is your experience with requirements of being bilingual in the leadership roles?
It's a great question, and I'm seeing more and more people, when they're promoted to a CEO or executive position, it says this person has experience at this company and this company, and they speak 2 languages, 3 languages, 4 languages, 5 languages. And you're seeing more and more of that as a credential or a badge of honor when people get to an executive role. The multi-languages and being bilingual or even multilingual is very critical here. However, in the research that we found, it never percolated as one of the top issues or competency. I think that is a critical one, but if we're an international or multinational company, it's probably going to be more critical than a global one, because with a global company, you can't think that we're going to speak all the different languages. The project that I mentioned that I'm working on right now, obviously Australia, New Zealand, Great Britain is not an issue for someone based in North America, but when we're looking at China and India and France and Poland and Russia and Latin America and South Africa, there's some different issues there, and you're going to have to be able to operate in a complex and changing environment and be able to adapt to those different languages, and knowing that they're going to spell differently, grammar is going to be different, and that you have to adjust and not just expect them to adjust to you. Yeah, and that's wonderful. And one of the things that we experienced recently with one of our global rollouts was each of the areas wanted to have the software in their specific language. And that's a really hard thing to do as a software company. So one of the things we did is we built that capability within the user interface so that if you had a multi-tenant environment, you could use those multiple different languages to be able to manage talent in the way that they're used to interacting. So I think that has multiple implications, on both sides. Joanne has a question: does mobility factor into your model at all? So John, that sounds like it's a question for you on the model. Good, and I'm going to assume mobility being looking at expatriate assignments. And Joanne, it's a great question if I understand it correctly. The mobility of individuals moving to different countries is one thing that expat assignments can succeed on, but it's also, if there's a lack of mobility, then it's a huge part of failure. And one of the things that we look at with expat assignments is that Jack Welch said, the future CEOs of GE should not be me. They should not have grown up in just one region or one country. They should have expat assignments. That being said, if you look at the failure rate of expat assignments, a lot of the expat assignment failure rates tend to be not the person's technical knowledge, not their language capabilities. However, it's looking at the person's personal life and is that capable of being mobile. So some individuals, their spouses, their families, their extended families are okay being mobile, but if someone takes an expat assignment and does very well from 8 to 5 in the job and goes home and their kids are miserable or their spouse is miserable or some other factors, then they're not going to be successful in that job, and that's one of the key themes. Yeah. One other aspect of this mobility that brings me to a better practice that read about recently is there's a hotel chain that's based in North America, and most of their growth is happening in China. The CEO realized that, and knowing that expat assignments would be a challenge, he has taken a novel and fascinating approach that the executive team, they moved their entire executive office for 1 to 2 months in the summertime to China. And then they have to deal with the time zone differences, different cultures, and things like that. They went to China the first year. It was such a success. They're going to Dubai the second year. And the entire executive team is relocating, not for an extended expat assignment, but just for the 4 to 7 week time frame in the summer.
That's fantastic. That's really a great idea. And then, Mike, I see your question, how far down the management chain does that apply? One experience that we had when we're talking about this, this language thing was we were working with a different global company, and we were developing a specific talent pool for Latin America. And I think I shared this with John yesterday. What happened was we thought he had every skill ready. He knew the business, he knew the products, he knew the customers, he knew everything that we had included on our succession competency requirement list. Well, he went over and took on the assignment, moved his family, was ready to lead. It had been a planned succession to replace someone else. And what we found when he got there was he had a really hard time developing credibility for one factor, and it was because he didn't speak the language of the local city that he was in. So what we had to do literally was go back, and we had to keep the gentleman who was currently in the role for another year, and we spent 1 year immersing him in the language and the culture, and then he re-entered, and he re-entered in a way that we had him on site being collaborative for that extended period of time. So sometimes language can be really important, even though it might not percolate up on an assessment, because what happens is you don't realize it until you're actually there and you're going through those specific experiences. So that's just a different example of when language was really important to have be bilingual or multilingual.
That's excellent. Mike has the next question, looking at how far down the management chain does this apply when we start looking at succession management. And I think there's two ways to look at this. One, you look at a certain level within the organization and saying at this level we need to have effective succession management plans. Another way to look at it is the critical roles within the organization. And there might be a critical role that's not necessarily at a higher level, but yeah, it's a critical role, and if that role left tomorrow for whatever reason, it's going to hinder the business. And so I don't necessarily think it's a question of what level as far as how far down the chain. I think we have to look at both level as well as critical role, the criticality to the business, and that we would have a succession plan for both of those, level and role. Mm-hmm. Now, highlighting another organization, once you have the succession plan, that encourages the organic growth, the motivation to develop internally to fill that role. And while outside hires can be good and bring different views, if it's all outside hires into an organization, then it really is a knock on the internal development plan motivation because they don't think that their promotion is available to them.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for attending the webinar. We really appreciate your dedication to coming back to these webinars over and over and again. If this was a new one, we hope you look at some of the what we call webisodes, because as you know, I do them mostly in story format. But you know, this one was unique, and we hope you enjoyed it, and we look forward to you downloading the recorded version and/or asking us more about how we can help you. So thank you very much.
Thank you.